Yep.
Yes, it's working. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started with today's training. This is going to take the full 2 hours. So today's training is part 1 of building support. Your trainers are, as usual, myself, Chris Sports, and Seth Montgomery. So as we've mentioned before, we break the first 2 sections into 2 parts because otherwise we'd be on the phone for 4 hours and I think everybody would want to kill us. So this is part 1 of building support. And then we're going to take a 2-week break, and on October 15th, we're going to come back and do the second part of building support. So you're going to get a 2-week break after today's session, but we'll come back and wrap up building support in mid-October. All right, so here are the objectives for today's training session. At the end of our time together, you will be able to create a culture of engagement for volunteers. Next time, we're going to talk about the concept of ROVI and calculate over the next 2 sessions your organization's ROVI, or return on volunteer investment, for your volunteer engagement at your shelter or organization, and generate external support for your service enterprise transformation. Session 2, or all of building support, will touch on 6 of the service enterprise characteristics. They're listed on page 2 if you're following along in the participant materials, and you'll also always see them indicated in the top right-hand corner of the slides as we go along. You may also notice that this session touches on other characteristics such as outreach and effective training, but we are primarily going to focus on planning and development, leadership support, resource allocation, tracking and evaluation, funding, and partnering to extend reach. So this part is extremely important. So I want everybody to take notes. I cannot impress upon this enough. I need you guys to take some notes. We're going to begin talking about action planning today. You are going to have homework at the end of this session, and we are going to ask you to start on your first draft of your action plan. So you will definitely want to write down what I am about to say. I will send out the link to the recorded webinar tomorrow, so you can come back and listen to this section again if you would like, but I definitely recommend taking notes. What you see on the slide here is the template for the Service Enterprise Action and Certification Plan. You'll notice at the top, you will want to put in, and I have sent this to all of the team leads. So after last week's training session, what I sent to the team leads was this template with one slight modification, which I will elaborate on here in a few minutes, and then a document on action planning for Service Enterprise. So if the team leads have not taken a look at that information, please do so. If you'd like to share it with the rest of your group, your guiding coalition, that would be great. You're going to work on the action plan as a team, okay? And at the top, again, you're going to put in your organization. Right below that, you're going to put in your mission and your vision for your organization. And then in the third box you see on this template is where you will put your service enterprise vision. And remember, those are the vision statements that you guys presented to us last week. Most of you were happy with what you had. Some of you were still going to tweak that draft a little bit, and that's fine, but we're going to need you to shore that vision statement for service enterprise and volunteer engagement up, and you're going to put that in the third section. So again, we don't want a duplication of your organization's vision statement here. What we want in the second box is the mission and the vision for your organization. In the third box, where it says service enterprise vision, that's where you'll put in the vision statement that you came up with for volunteer engagement and the Service Enterprise Initiative. If you guys have any questions on that, please let me know before the end of this session, but it should be pretty straightforward. So again, if you're not sure you want to keep your Service Enterprise Vision Statement, you're going to need to finalize that over the next couple of weeks. Below that, you see where you will input your action items for your Service Enterprise Action Plan. So the first column that you see is characteristic. There is a drop down. I don't know if you guys can see right here where the box is. So not the drop down you see where it says the word characteristic, but if you put your mouse into the cells below the word characteristic in that column, that's where you'll hit the drop down, and that drop down will allow you to choose one of the 10 characteristics. So you'll want to work on action items for planning and development. Use that drop-down box, find planning and development, and select it from there. You don't need to type it in. So you're going to want to start to develop action items for all 10 characteristics eventually. We're not there today. I'll tell you what the homework needs to look like before we wrap up today, but that's where you're going to find the drop-down for all 10 characteristics. The second column says Cohort accelerators. If you guys think about training session number 1, Sept went through the 8 steps in the Cohort model for change, okay? And so when you use the drop down, again, it's not going to be where you see the drop down for Cohort accelerator, but you're going to want to hover over a cell below that with your mouse, and there'll be another drop down, and you'll see all 8 of the steps of the Cohort accelerator model for change. You're going to want to select a step within that accelerator for the action item that you are writing. I'm going to give you guys the biggest and easiest hint you could possibly have on your action plan. So write this down, because we say this over and over again with each cohort. This is the easiest thing we're going to ask you to do with regards to Service Enterprise. When you use the drop down on the Cohort accelerators and you're picking one of the 8 steps for that change management model, go with your gut. We do not care which step you pick. We will not police that column at all. We won't even look at it. Just pick one. So go with your gut. Pick a step you think makes the most sense for your action item. The 3 of us will be very happy with that, and we will accept it. It will be the only column.
No matter what.
Yes, it will be the only column in that entire plan we probably never give you feedback on or have comments and edits to. So make your lives easy and just go with your gut on the Cohort accelerators. Now the third column says action item. This is where you're going to start creating action items for your characteristics. Pay attention, this is your homework for the next session. I'm not going to ask you to come up with action items for all 10 characteristics just yet. It's a lot of work. But we do want to get you starting to work with the action plan a little bit. It takes some getting used to. And you'll see when we get into this a little bit further down the road, but in some ways Service Enterprise has its own language. So we want you to start getting comfortable with creating action items. I'm going to ask for your homework for you guys to develop a few action items for the 3 most vital characteristics. I normally will put somebody on the spot and ask them what the 3 most vital of the 10 characteristics are, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm in a very generous mood today. So I'm going to tell you what those 3 vital characteristics are, and I'm going to want to see in your homework for the next session that you came up with action items for the following 3 characteristics: planning and development, leadership support, and effective training. I'll repeat myself. I need action items on your first draft action plan for planning and development, leadership support, and effective training. Give me at least 2, if not 3 action items for all 3 of those characteristics. If you want to create some action items for other characteristics, great, go for it. Be happy to look at those. But your homework is for you to create at least 2 to 3 action items for planning and development, leadership support, and effective training.
Hey, Kimberly.
Yes, ma'am.
I am pretty sure that during the training today, we are going to give them some suggestions.
We are.
Of potential action items. It's not even cheating. It's not even cheating if we give them to them, right?
Absolutely. So that'll be my next 2 slides. Thank you. That was a great intro. I want to tell you guys, and this is where you need to, again, write this down. We say this over and over and over and over again. And after we review your first draft action plans, I'm actually going to insert this language into your plan until you get a feel for writing it. But action items need to be succinct and they need to be specific. Let me say that again because I'm having trouble with S's today because today is my Monday. Action items need to be succinct and they need to be specific. The action item, and we'll give you guys some examples on the next couple slides, needs to tell us what you are going to do and how you are going to do it. Okay? What you are going to do and how you are going to do it very specifically and very succinctly. You'll see when we start to review your action plans, the one comment we make over and over again with everybody is, this is not specific enough, please give us more information. I don't need a dossier. 1 or 2 sentences will suffice. I will give you an example now. One of the action items for effective training is either creating a volunteer handbook or updating a volunteer handbook. And many of you have that as a recommendation under effective training in your diagnostic reports. So if you have a handbook already and it hasn't been updated in a year or 2, 3, and you've got some outdated information in there, your action item for effective training could be as simple as update our volunteer handbook. Short, sweet, to the point. You're telling me what you're going to do, right? And how you're going to do it. If you haven't created a handbook, you could write a different action item for effective training that says, create a volunteer handbook. It's very succinct. It's very specific. So again, think about when you're writing an action item, not only keeping it short and specific, but tell us what you want to do and how you are going to do that. The next column, column number 4, is leader support. You're going to put which members of your organization will be responsible for seeing that action item through. Let me please give you a giant hint. Do not make your volunteer coordinator or manager the leader support on everything. That won't go over well. And we will make comments on it. This is a guiding coalition plan. Everyone on the team who's part of Service Enterprise, and even some members who are outside of the team, depending on what that action item is, may be part of your lead or your support. So tell us the person in your organization that is going to take charge of that. We used to let people put in people's names. We're now going to ask you to put in titles of jobs, and here's why. Turnover happens in animal welfare. If you put in someone's name and they leave, guess what, guys? You got to make sure you update that plan every time somebody leaves. If you put in the title of that person, you don't have to update it because the title doesn't change. It's just the person in that position changes. All right. The next column is resources. What resources will you use to complete that action item? They can be people. They can be hard copy resources. They can be departments. They can be outside organizations. I'll go back to the volunteer handbook example. If you are creating a volunteer handbook, right, who's going to help write that handbook? Are you going to use other handbooks to help write that handbook and create it? If we sent you a copy of the Best Friends Handbook, you can put that down as a resource. So I'm not looking for sentences here. What I'm looking for under resources is people, hard copy resources, departments, or outside organizations that are going to provide resources to you to make that action item happen. Then you have start and end in the next columns. You want to put in a start date for your action item and when you hope to complete it as your end date. These can change. Your action plan is a living and breathing document. So it is okay if you put in dates and then you have to change them at a later time. Don't put TBD, please, or TBA. Try to come up with some concrete start and end dates that you're going to do your action item. Again, this is a living, breathing document. You can change it as needed. The next column is your performance measure. Again, please listen to what I'm about to say. Everyone struggles with performance measures. We in animal welfare so write this down. We in animal welfare tend to think of performance measures as something we can measure concretely, like data, right? Number of animals adopted out at Clear the Shelter, or number of animals in foster care, right? Or number of people that wrote their county commissioner, you know, on behalf of supporting legislation or changing legislation, right? That is true. That is what a performance measure is. But for the purpose of the Service Enterprise Initiative and how Points of Light as an organization, because this is their intellectual property, defines a performance measure, it is not always a hard data point. or a percentage or a number. It is oftentimes why you are doing your action item, right? As it pertains to life-saving, creating a culture of engagement between staff and volunteers, and driving your mission. I will repeat that. A performance measure is not always a metric tied to percentages or numbers. Points of Light views performance measure as why you're doing an action item related to your life-saving mission, creating a culture of engagement between staff and volunteers, and driving change, okay? So think of it as the why. Here's a little hint. Write this down, please. I'll say it again. Write this down, please. This is the other one we spend a lot of time asking people to edit. When you write your performance measure, look at your action item. Ask yourself, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this action item? We are doing this, your answer should be, we are doing this so that ... Whatever comes after the ... or the we are doing this so that, that's your performance measure. Give you an example, going back to the handbook. If you don't have a volunteer handbook and your action item under effective training is to create a volunteer handbook, why would you want to create a volunteer handbook? So that volunteers understand what's expected of them and what they can gain from their experience. It's not tied to a metric or data. It's tied to the overarching why you're creating a handbook. So again, the performance measure, and I will insert this into your first draft after we give you feedback, is the why behind your action item. Ask yourself, why are we doing this action item? We are doing it so that, and whatever comes behind your so that is your answer, again, tied to engaging volunteers, driving your mission, creating a culture of engagement. Sometimes it can be a metric, right? If you want to increase the number of foster volunteers, right? So we can get more animals into foster care, or so we can increase our foster home base by 25%. So I'm not saying it can never be a metric or data. What I'm saying is oftentimes it's not necessarily tied to that in the Service Enterprise Initiative. Okay, we have two more columns, and then I'm going to show you some examples. The next to last column says evidence for certification. Please write this down. Evidence for certification would be hard copy evidence that Chris and Seth and I can review to be certain you've actually completed your action item. It's hard copy evidence. Going back to the handbook. If you've created a handbook, if you've updated your handbook, guess what we want to see as evidence for certification? A copy of that handbook. So it is hard copy resources that we can view to say, yes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this organization has completed this action item, and here's the evidence to prove it. The evidence needs to be compelling enough to prove you've completed your action item. And so your action item, your performance measure, and your evidence for certification need to be tied together very tightly. Last but not least, the status. There are different statuses for action items. It can be not started, meaning we're putting this down as something we want to do, but we're not starting it yet. We're going to start it in 3 months. And again, we'll know that by what you put in for start and end dates. It can be in progress, meaning we've started it, but we're not finished. So for example, if you're creating written position descriptions for every opportunity for volunteers at your organization, and you've written a few, but you've got 10 more to write, that status would be in progress. You've started it, but it's not done, right? It can also be completed. So once you've finished an action item, you can mark it as completed. Again, going back to the handbook as an example, once you update or you create your handbook and you give us evidence that that's been done and we can view that handbook, you can mark the status as completed. It is done. Move on to the next action item. The last status is ongoing. That is an action item that you will do fairly frequently. And my definition of fairly frequently means on a quarterly or biannual basis. It does not necessarily mean on an annual basis. Let me give you an example. If you decide as an action item for leadership support that you're going to reward your staff that effectively engage volunteers, you're not going to have one staff meeting where you recognize an employee. And City of San Marcos, I do see that you have a question. Let me just finish my train of thought, and then I'll take a look at that in the chat box. If you are going to reward employees for effectively engaging volunteers, you're not going to have one staff meeting where you recognize one staff member for doing that. Hey, Chris Sports did a great job engaging volunteers. Let's give her a shout out at this meeting. And then you're never going to do that again for any other staff member. That's not rewarding employees that effectively engage volunteers. That's rewarding one employee once to effectively engage volunteers. So that is something you are going to do with frequency, and therefore provide us evidence that you've done it on a few occasions, but you can mark that status as ongoing because this is something you will be doing routinely. Again, the definition of ongoing would be anything you're going to be doing quarterly or biannually. If it's something you'll do once a year or less than once a year, once it's finished, mark it to complete. So again, you have 4 choices for status, and there's a drop down just like there is for characteristic and Cohort accelerator. It'll be not started, in progress, completed, or ongoing. There's one last column I need to tell you about that is not on the slide, but it is in the action template that you guys have. In between Cohort accelerator and action item, Chris has inserted another column here that says code. Don't worry about that column now. You'll need to worry about it later, but we're not going to bog you down with the codes at this point. That will come after you guys have worked with the action plan a little bit more and right as we're getting into the individualized coaching calls. But you will see there's a column right in between Cohort accelerator and action item that says code. You will need that column later, so just leave it blank for now and work on everything else. Let me see what
Kimberly, that's what San Marcos was asking.
Perfect. All right, I think I answered your question, Darianne, so there you go. We'll explain more. We don't want to get into the codes too early in this process. Suffice it to say, you'll be assigning codes to different action items within characteristics. We will give you a roadmap to assigning those codes. The language for that coding is kind of like speaking a foreign language. That's the best way we can explain it. And so we don't want to get into that too early in the game. We want to give you some opportunities to practice working with the action plan template first. And then, like I said, before we get into individual coaching is when we'll thoroughly explain to you what that code column is all about. I'm going to stop here for a second. My next 2 slides are going to give you guys some concrete examples of action items for planning and development and leadership support. But I just want to take a minute. If there are any other questions, please unmute yourself and ask that question. I'll pause for about 30 seconds to see if anyone has a question. And again, if you phoned in, it is *6 to mute and unmute. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. So let's move on so I can give you guys some examples. All right, you see 3 action items here. And again, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but I'll be sending you the slide set tomorrow, along with the recording of this webinar, so you'll have access to this in the webinar recording, and then you'll actually have the slides that you can blow up as well. But what you see on this page are 3 planning and development action items that an organization who has already certified gave us. So this is a real-world action plan example from an organization that are already certified. So you're going to label your characteristics. Do us a favor, please put your action items for your characteristics together. So we don't want to see an action item for planning and development on the first line, then an action item for effective training on the second line, and then an action item for leadership support on the third line, and then you go back to planning and development. You want to group your action items together by characteristic. So when we're reviewing them, we see all the planning and development action items together, then we see your leadership support action items, and then we see your effective training action items. It makes it a lot easier for us, and honestly, guys, for you in the long run, as this plan goes, if you will group your action items by characteristic. You can see in this example that Kelly, who was the volunteer manager for this organization, picked Cohort Model 8, Institute Change, Step 8, as her example for all 3 of these. We were fine with that. Again, go with your gut on the Cohort accelerators. The first action item, and there's the code, but we're not going to talk about codes today. Just write your action item. Her first action item for planning and development was to request new volunteer job descriptions from all supervisory staff members and add those jobs to their volunteer opportunity directory. Okay, she told us what she was going to do and how she was going to do it. You'll notice here under staff and lead, she does have names because she was in one of the first cohorts. Again, don't put names, put the title of the staff that are leading and supporting because headcount changes and staffing changes. Then she's putting her resources here on the next column, so the fifth column. She's got time cooperation from supervisory staff. And we're just going to say right now, we used to let people put time as a resource, and it is a resource, folks, but none of us have enough time, and we all acknowledge that. None of us in animal welfare have enough time. Whether you're HSUS or Best Friends or Second Chance Shelter, right? None of us have enough time. So leave time out as your resource and think about what other resources, people, organizations, departments, and hard copy resources will help you complete that action item. She's put in her dates, July of 17 to August of 17, and then this is her performance measure. Why is she requesting new volunteer job descriptions from supervisors and adding those volunteer opportunities to the directory? Well, she's doing this so that the number of volunteer assignments will increase and supervisors will feel empowered to ask for what they need. Okay, so she's telling us why. We are doing this action item so that that's your performance measure. And then she's linked the online volunteer opportunity directory and marked this as complete. I'll give you another one here. I'm going to skip this middle one and go down to the bottom one. She sent out her next action item for planning and development is send out a needs assessment to all program leads customized to our organization to enable them to create new volunteer position descriptions. That is her action item. Again, you want to put who's the lead by title, what the resources are, the dates, and you can use ongoing as an end date if it's something you're going to be doing routinely. Then I'm comfortable with you using ongoing as a date. Why is she sending out a needs assessment to program leads? She's doing this so she can understanding by staff of the process they use to evaluate volunteer needs and increase their feeling of ownership over those needs. And then she sent us a link to that assessment. So those are a couple of examples for planning and development. Let me give you a couple more for leadership support. So on leadership support, again, she's picked her Cohort accelerator. We don't care which one you pick. She's creating a volunteer program vision statement, right? She's got her leads, her resources, her dates. Why is she creating a volunteer program vision statement? Leadership, staff, and volunteers will have a clear understanding of the goals of our volunteer program. And then she linked the vision statement here and marked this as complete, okay? And then she's got one down here, meet with executive director to discuss press release on the importance of our service enterprise training and how adding skilled volunteer positions has been a benefit to our organization. Again, she's got her leads, resources, dates. Why is she doing that? Why is she meeting with the executive director to discuss that press release and talking about adding skilled positions? The executive director will gain even more understanding of the Service Enterprise Initiative and have talking points for discussion beyond the press release. And then she's linked the meeting on that calendar and results of that meeting. So those are a couple of examples, and I think Pasco has a question. Hey guys, so Pasco County is asking if the recommendations in the SED for the various characteristics work as a good roadmap for potential action items. Absolutely, you are absolutely correct, Pasco County Animal Services. All of you need to have your diagnostic results, and this is why I asked the leads to make copies for everyone on the Guiding Coalition Service Enterprise team. When you sit down to work on your action items for planning and development, leadership support, and effective training, you want to look at the recommendations under those three characteristics in your diagnostic. And that's where you'll start to form some initial action items for your action plan. As we said when we went through the diagnostic results with each organization, you don't have to do every action item. You guys can pick and choose based on those recommendations in the diagnostic what works for you. You may already be working on some other things or come up with some other ideas as well that were not in the diagnostic, and those are fine to put on the plan too. Give yourselves credit for what you're doing, okay? So it can be recommendations from the diagnostic, so you definitely want to have that with you when you're working on this. It can also be credit for things you're already doing or tweaking, okay? Or things you've come up with since you started Service Enterprise. All of those things can count as actionable items. Everything doesn't have to be from scratch on this plan. As Seth always says, give yourselves credit for what you are already doing. So those are some examples. I'm going to stop there. Again, we'll go over the homework at the end. I want 2 to 3 action items, at least 2 to 3 action items for planning and development, leadership support, and effective training before the next session, and I'll give you the deadline for that at the end of today's training. I just want to take another minute to stop and see if we have any additional questions on the first draft action plans before I turn it over to Seth. And again, if you want to ask it aloud versus chat, *6 to unmute yourself if you dialed in. Okay. If you have questions, and again, we'll go over when this is due at the end of today's session. If you have any questions when you're working on this, please reach out to us via email. We are always happy to assist if you have questions. You do not have to wait until the next training session or until we give you feedback on your first draft. We're always available. Just start with email because we tend to be on the phone a lot, and you'll get a much faster response to your questions if you ask it via email. And then if we need to hop on the phone, we can do that. All right, so with that, I am going to just turn the screen over to Seth, and he's going to take it from here.
Alrighty, so how Kimberly talked about in one of the objectives, we're going to spend a lot of time on a culture of engagement. So there's going to be a lot of good discussion. So all of you that are remote, you want to make sure that you probably stay on your conference call line pretty much the entire time that I'm going to be talking, because we're going to do a lot of good stuff. So we're going to start a little exercise of what does organizational culture mean to you. So we're going to spend about 5 minutes, just take some time, and I want you guys to submit it in the chat box, which is in the main part in your drop down. And you're just going to kind of send it over to me and tell me what you feel, or what does organizational culture mean to you. And then I'm going to read them aloud for each organization. Make sure before you send, put who your organization is, because some of you have your name, some of you have your name and your organization, but be sure to identify exactly who you are before you send over your little comment to me. So we'll take about 5 minutes, like I said, and we'll start now. This is your 1 minute, guys. 1 more minute. All right, I'm gonna start reading these out. Some of them are still coming in. So Gateway Pet Guardian said a buy into shared values. Shelby Humane said shared expectations. Emma at Riverside County, she said, sorry, they're all coming. What does organizational culture mean to me? How I feel when I have to return to work on a Monday. Let's see, SPCA of Texas, respect, gratitude, positivity, rewarding, appreciation, caring, involving, welcoming, inclusive. That's what organization culture means to us. Really good stuff. Riverside County as a whole, mindset and value of the department and how those values are manifested through our actions. Beautiful. Seminole County, let's see, I think it's still coming through. HSUS, so the way we act around here and the impact it has. Good. Second chance, unique personalities working together for the same mission, teamwork in all caps. I really like that. City of San Marcos, the combination of atmosphere and expectations for interactions and performance, which are unique to the organization and contribute to its growth. Pasco County, a filling of your space within the organization and its mission. And then SPCA again, extending compassion for animals to the community. Beautiful. And let's see, I think one more coming in. And Carol, HSUS as well, organizational culture, principles accepted organization-wide for how employees will react and or interact with each other and with leadership. And then Seminole County says staff and volunteers are realizing we have the same goal and vision and ability to be approachable to each other, both staff and volunteers. So really great stuff. So when we dive into the actual definition of culture, one definition, and it's organizational culture as a pattern of shared assumptions learned by a group as it solves problems. These are internal and external, of course, and therefore considered to be the correct way to behave, perceive, and think in future situations. So a lot of great stuff that you guys were saying. It would hit on everything. How I look at culture, and we just literally, the three of us had to talk about this morning, the root of it, how I look at it, culture is like an integrated or unified behavior, human behavior, beliefs, values. So we're looking at the same essence of our organization, how we look at one another, our staff, our volunteers, our community, and we're all in the same driving force. And we're really focusing on how do we solve the problem, of animals, unneeded animals dying, and how can we address our community's needs in an effective way. So when we look at culture, as you see on the screen, it includes what we see. So this is everything from dress code to behaviors between staff and or volunteers or both. And then what we say, so our ideals, our goals, our values, our aspirations, and what we believe, so that underlying assumption. So good job on that activity, guys. You guys get what culture is. So we're gonna see a lot of good stuff coming from you guys. So like I said, a lot of discussions are gonna be happening through these slides. So we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about, because we're building on discussions around change management and building internal support. So we need to look at and ask ourselves, what are possible challenges to integrating volunteers in new ways, in different ways throughout your organization. So we're probably going to take about, I would say, probably about 5 minutes to work on this exercise, and I want you guys to just meet collectively as the organization and talk this out. What are some of the challenges for integrating volunteers in new or different exciting ways throughout your organization that you might come into contact with? And we will start our time now. And from this, so I should probably expand on that. From this, I want you guys to identify one challenge. I know there's going to be a list of them. So one challenge, and put that in the chat box, and I'm going to read them aloud, and we'll kind of have some discussions around them too. About 1 more minute, guys. All right, I'm gonna start reading some of these. You guys can keep coming in. So Shelby Humane, training, time for training. Yes, time is always a concern. Pasco County, tenured volunteers being set in their ways or views on how to support the organization. Yes. New Jersey, resistance to change from staff and volunteers. Gateway Pet Guardians, trusting that they meet expectations and that you would get from an employee. Second Chance, unwillingness to commit to change. HSUS Hillary, so this is a good one. Totally get it. Geographic location of employees and volunteers, resistance to change, being willing to relinquish control. That's a big thing. Investment of time, and we could keep going on for like 10 hours. Yes, we definitely can. So Seminole County, getting the county permission to allow volunteers to work in certain areas and do certain tasks, going through legal. Yes, for munis that can sometimes be a concern, but I'm here to tell you as a person who works on a muni and did service enterprise and other things, it can be done. I know everyone's system is a little different. There's other laws, and it's usually, again, that culture is a concern at some of those other departments. So our human behaviors and how we can kind of go about it at different angles and work on building those relationships. That's the biggest thing in maintaining them, because if you can have a lone nut, as we talked about earlier in another department, to back you, it can make a big difference to have more people come on board. So definitely a task, but it can be done. County of Riverside, eliminating preconceived notions of what volunteers can and cannot do. Yes, those assumptions, and we all know what assumptions do. SPC of Texas, accountability, very big. City of San Marcos, lack of staff time to work on staff buy-in and full development integration of volunteer program. Yeah, we never have enough time again, but we'll definitely work on helping you guys and train you guys to see some things so we can work on getting some staff time to really focus and bring the volunteer program to the forefront, but working specifically to have those mentor and buddy volunteers to kind of take those reins and help you guys in a more detailed, efficient manner all across all parameters, if that makes sense of what I'm saying right now. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of great conversations. Go
Jason,
ahead.
can I just make a comment? Yeah, so if you're a municipal shelter participating in service enterprise and you're having any challenges with legal in terms of getting volunteers to do certain tasks, reach out to us individually. We've dealt with this for years now. I can give you a list of organizations that have been successful in having that discussion with city or county legal teams, and you can reach out to them to find out what worked for them, and we've got some resources too. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, a lot of large munis and you know, even small munis have been very successful, and we have a lot of great resources like Kimberly said, and we can connect to those people. Clearly, I am stuttering today. So we did identify challenges. So I wonder what's going to be next. How might we go about addressing these challenges? So we're going to spend a lot of time, again, facilitating some discussions amongst your organization to think about how might you address these challenges and how can you ensure that staff and current volunteers can be prepared to work with volunteers in a service enterprise, aka an effective organization who focuses on volunteer engagement. So I'm going to pick 3 organizations randomly, so get ready. So you guys are going to spend a good amount of time working on this, and what we want to do is this conversation should really focus on, you know, the growth goals of your volunteer program and engaging your community throughout the organization, as well as how, you know, volunteers can augment existing things. So how can they assist with some of these challenges. Sometimes they can be a challenge, but believe it or not, they have a lot of great ideas and they can help you guys get through some of these things. So it can be very complex and very specific to each of your organizations. You know, like we said, we have pretty small organizations and we have another national organization on this cohort like HSUS. Their things are going to look a little different compared to another organization of a smaller, you know, kind of 1 or 2 campus size compared to them being, you know, all around the nation. So we want to spend a good amount of time and have a lot of great dialogue with this, and we'll kind of open up when we call on those organizations, we can definitely expand on those discussions. So let's take about 10 minutes. I'm going to say 10 minutes for this one because there's a lot of things we're going to talk about. So we will start the time now. And again, I'm going to call on 3 organizations, so be ready. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself or chat in that chat box too. This is your 2 minutes, guys, 2 minutes. Alrighty, so the people I pick on, the people I call on, I'm not picking on. I just want to put that out there. And those of you who do not get called on today, it's not because there's favoritism whatsoever. I don't believe in such things. So first, SPCA of Texas. So you identified, if I can recall, on your challenge was accountability. So if you guys can share, and if you called in, remember *6 is to unmute and mute yourself. How might you address the challenge of accountability, and how can you ensure that staff and current volunteers are prepared to work with volunteers in a service enterprise? Are you guys there? It's quiet. Oh, I heard something.
Now can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so we've decided to take a structured approach to onboarding volunteers, similar to how we do it with our staff, and provide clear expectations, training, and continuous support within each department.
Wonderful. So we talk a lot about that in onboarding and supervision, having that foundation and structure in place. So if they are cohesive for how you train and onboard and train your staff, or how you onboard and train your volunteers, there's going to be a little difference, but usually volunteers are an extension of staff, so they're going to be doing a lot of the same things. So good job. Let's see next, South Jersey. You identified, let me find this. Resistance to change from staff and volunteers, I believe, is your challenge. So how might you address this challenge? And the next bullet point, how can you ensure that staff and current volunteers are prepared?
So we have, we wrote, including all parties in discussion making and decision making, giving specific training to the staff and the volunteers. Managing their expectations, more communication, welcoming feedback and giving positive participating staff acknowledgement.
Great, a lot of good stuff. So when you say giving everybody a or the voice kind of thing, is that like staff and volunteers, volunteer coordinator, yes, all of the above?
Yes, all of the above.
Great, because we do see a lot of time, I think we mentioned this last training, the volunteer coordinator manager is like the main task person to understand and engage with volunteers, but they don't have a seat at that table when really big decisions are being made for like changing of policies and procedures, and a lot of leadership don't even think about taking the volunteer voice. Again, Kimberly says they have a voice, but they don't always have a vote, but your volunteer coordinator manager should definitely be involved in a lot of those decisions and those decision making to really bring forth, hey, what did we think about the volunteers when we were thinking, talking about these things? So good job. And last, Pasco County, you identified, let me scroll up, tenured volunteers, yeah, being set in their ways or their views on how to support the organization. That's definitely a challenge. So how are you going to address that, and how can you ensure staff and current volunteers are prepared?
So hey everyone, we were kind of talking. Our staff's pretty excited. So staff is on board, man. We kind of included them in all of our leadership team meetings and all of our all-hands meetings since we've started this journey, and staff is on board. One thing that we're looking at as far as our tenured volunteers being set in their ways is they're the minority, and we want to definitely involve them as much as we can, but our volunteer and foster coordinator likes to utilize a term called a cheerocracy, and we are definitely a cheerocracy, and we feel like we're going to have the vast majority of the people on board with these changes that we're making, and the minority that are not quite on board, we'll try to include them as best we can, but they will see the direction the group is heading and the positivity that's coming out of these changes, and we feel like eventually they'll climb on board.
Great. A lot of good stuff. So other things we see, I just want to hit on before we move on. Some things we also see is that staff fear that volunteers will replace them. So although volunteer managers can be used in that conversation, it's really that, they can articulate that because they can speak upon it, but we want to make sure that we set up the executive director, the board members, and other staff to be prepared to facilitate those conversations. Like, the volunteers are not going to replace staff. Like, let's be real. That doesn't happen. So just making sure that we train, facilitate, those conversations around that and be better prepared, so we can expand, our mission, our impact, etc. And you guys hit on it earlier at Seminole about the legality purposes and some things that people do run into. So there are definitely red flags that come about when people talk about having volunteers more immersed in the conversation and laying off staff. A good thing to know that there are unions involved. It's sometimes good to have like a union representative on your guiding coalition so they can better articulate and understand where there is that overlap, and making sure that you really research, some of those legalities, speaking with your legal department about those changes, etc., like we discussed earlier. So a big thing that Chris and Chris talks about, and you guys hit on it, is making sure that it's a great opportunity to make sure that that there's additional training and consulting, particularly around preparing staff and the organization to work with volunteers. We all know that this organization or this industry has changed drastically. We all probably have been in those organizations, or probably have been those leaders who hired people because they loved animals and they were good with animals, but they literally told you in the interview that they don't like people. So that's not the new way. And that's kind of been changing in the last, I would say, like 10-ish years, especially really so in the last 5 from what I can remember being in the industry. And we really want to focus on how we can better prepare people to understand, hey, I know you love animals, you're good with animals, but you got to be good with people too. Like, this is a people industry. We have to have people to adopt, we have people to foster, we have to be able to articulate these things and work well with our community. And those are people. The animals cannot adopt themselves out. The animals can't, foster themselves out. That would be wonderful. We probably all wouldn't have jobs today if that was the case, but we need people in order to help our animals. So good job, guys. A lot of great discussion. So you guys have heard a lot of good things, and I hope you're writing stuff down. So some action plan ideas. So I would definitely write this down if you haven't been. Facilitating those conversations about engaging volunteers and any concerns the team has. So making sure that you're assessing whether team members have had training or experience engaging volunteers. If they have, great. Leverage their skill sets to help become like an advocate and a cheerleader to get those other people on board who might not have the training and or facilitate the training. So we want to make sure that we're training our staff, we're training even some of our volunteers. There are some volunteers there who don't necessarily want to really engage with people, but they have to. You know, a lot of people come in to walk dogs and pet cats, but we got to make sure we got people talking to the people so they can get animals saved. And to discuss what a culture of engagement would look like for your organization, we've done a lot of great conversations collectively as the Guiding Coalition and leaders in our organizations, but we need to get everybody involved and we need to have staff buy-in. And we're not just going to do it to them, like Chris says, we're going to do it with them. So we want to get everybody, you know, all team members really talking about what culture looks like for each of your organizations. And that looks different for everybody.
Hey, Jay, Seth, can I jump in for a second?
Of course.
Thank you, dear. I happened this past weekend to be looking over some notes that I took at a workshop I attended at the HSUS conference a couple years ago. And one of the notes that I wrote down I thought was really relevant to what we're doing here. It says, make change as easy as possible based on your target audience's perceived cost and benefits. So it's really saying, you know, this is going to impact your staff. What are the costs and benefits to your staff? And it may not be what you think the costs and benefits are. It's their perceived cost and benefits. So you need to get that input from them. And then once you know the things that they're concerned about and the things that they're excited about, then you need to look at how you're going to implement that change to minimize the costs and really boost the benefits. Same thing is true with trying to implement change with your existing volunteers. Find out from them, what do they perceive as the costs and the benefits of that change, and then implement that change accordingly. That's it.
Thank you, Chris, for hitting that. That's very, very true. So last discussion, we're going to talk about, we've been having a lot of good stuff. So, you know, we kind of have an idea of what your organization's culture looks like, but you guys are going to spend about 5 minutes hitting on these bullet points. And I'm going to call upon 3 to 4 organizations randomly, depending on upon time, because we still got Chris to go over her section. So let's take 5 minutes and then hopefully 5 minutes to discuss. So what do you know about your organization's culture in regard to volunteer engagement? We've been having those discussions. What do you need to learn and how are you going to go about learning that? What steps can you take to help shift that culture, those attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, towards a culture of engagement? And where would be a good place to start? So we're kind of coming all back around, and cannoli is grumbling, excuse me. I don't know if you guys can hear that. We're coming back around, so let's take 5 minutes and I'll see how time is when we come back to discuss, and we'll call upon 3 to 4 organizations. Time starts now. This is your 1 minute warning, guys. All right. I think we can get 4 organizations in the next 5 minutes. So my first, second chance. If you are muted, remember if you called into *6. So let's talk about each bullet point.
Our culture is reactive. If a volunteer shows up, we just put them to work and whatever. And we're not proactive, seeking out the types of volunteers or seeking out programs and trying to fill it with a certain type of volunteers. We just, whoever shows up to work, we'll put them to work. There's no plan. I think that's probably that's it.
So what do
we need to learn? We need to learn how to set our goals, figure out what type of volunteers can help us achieve those goals, and seek those kind of people out through social media or whatever. Say, we need people to have this kind of skill. We really need to get more people to send out the word of different types of skills other than waiting for somebody to show up and put them to work with whatever skills they have.
Okay.
I'm just going to add, or you can take the people that are already offering up their time, find out what skills they have, or figure out what tasks you need done that you could train those people to do so that they will be the right fit for the tasks that you have.
Right.
And what steps might you take to shift that culture of reactiveness to proactiveness?
Setting up, being a lot more project oriented, coming up with the action plans so that we can kind of see what kind of people we would need to do jobs. And a good place to start for us would be a good organizational chart, just to see who we have now.
Yeah.
And I mean, organizational chart of our staff and volunteers, what we have now, to see what they're capable of.
Awesome. Another good thing we talked about, I think, in your, most of everybody said, is a needs assessment, a formal needs assessment. Kimberly really talked about that in planning development, and that really does help bring a lot of stuff to the forefront. So good job. Riverside County Animal Services, you are next. Any one of you can jump in.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
It's great. So we have had a lot of discussion because we have 3 different shelters and every situation is different. And so we have one that doesn't really engage volunteers in the manner that they can. But then we have our Riverside shelter that's actually really engaged with volunteers. And some of them, we say that they need to foster the culture of engagement, but there's such separation, and some of the staff don't want to be bothered and some do. So we see a big change. Am I making any sense?
You are, yes, I get it.
Yeah. And then we want to utilize the staff that do engage and get the other staff excited about it. In fact, we've had several volunteers that have promoted into employment. And so those staff seem to really be helping our volunteers, and they have people skills. So we're shifting to hiring in that area. Instead of doing people or animals people, we're doing people.
Got it. Good stuff. Good step.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Let's see. Gateway Pet Guardians. Any one of your team members want to share?
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
So we had, can you mute yourself? Sorry, it's echoing. Got it?
Someone else is still on. I can hear the reverb.
There it goes.
There you go.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, good. So we have, we let them take ownership. We let volunteers take ownership into high-level positions. We need to learn how to manage volunteer engagement when time is limited.
Mhm.
Also, the steps would be allocating more time to training others to do work that staff typically does, and being proactive. And where's a good place to start is time management.
For sure. And you guys are going through a big change yourselves. You're going from a very pretty small shelter where you're kind of reverse, where you have a lot of remote skill-based volunteers and you have a limited pool of shelter volunteers, from my understanding, from our
Right, yeah, we have
discussions.
more shelter volunteers, yeah.
And you're about to go to a very large new shelter. So you're definitely in a whole different community, a whole different need. So a lot of good
Yes.
conversations and a lot of planning will definitely go through that. And we're here to support you through all of it. So good
Awesome.
job.
Thank you.
I think we can squeeze in more. Hopefully, I would love to hear from HSUS. I know it's going to be a little different because you're a national organization, but I would love to hear, some of the things that you have, ideas you have, and any one of you
Yeah.
can share.
Yeah, this is Hillary. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So this has been really good, actually. I really relieved at how smart all my colleagues are. We've had good conversations. But one of the things that I think is the biggest place where we have to start is really with our leadership, and with an organization this size and all the things that our leadership has to focus on, it's hard to sort of get attention. We've had a change in leadership in the last couple of years and had a lot going on. So the stuff that we've started with is to really I have a meeting scheduled with our CEO very shortly to kind of talk her through this as we build our guiding coalition. But one of the things that I really loved is two parts. One is, once we get leadership on board and we sort of normalize volunteer engagement in all departments, it has been sort of focused in just a couple of places. But as we do that, one of the things we do at HSUS is we have like designated like file cleanup days, like either like everybody clean up your office or like where they'll block it out on the calendar and give executive approval for things like or file storage or actual document storage on drives and stuff. And if we can get to the place where we're normalizing volunteer engagement in such a way that we have like volunteer engagement days where people are able to block out their time and we're able to do things at that level, it'll really be a signal, I think, that it is just as embedded in our culture as the part about saving animals is, and that's sort of the goal.
That's awesome. Yeah. And like we said, everyone's a little different. Everyone has to look at that. And you hit on a wonderful thing. Leadership support is everything. We've talked a lot about that, but it really has to come from the top. And I know the larger the organization, sometimes there's so many degrees of separation, and sometimes it's harder to be able to get that person in a room and really say, hey, like, we're doing this, you're on board with it, but I really need you here. I really need you focused, and I really need you helping, drive and kind of push that implementation. So kudos to you guys. A lot of good stuff. I'm really excited for each and every one of the organizations in this cohort as we move to a better culture, not only for volunteers, but also for our staff and our community. That is all I have, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Okay, and so I need to take the screen back, huh?
I'm going to send it over to you. I'm trying to find you with it's a large, oh, you got it. Boom.
Did I get it?
You got it. I don't have to do anything.
Okay.
You made my
So
job
now
so
let's
easy.
just get my slideshow open. All right, look, we're on a roll here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about human capital strategies. And this is an important part of service enterprise. Actually, it's an important part of running any organization. And when we think about capital, we tend to think about financial capital. That's where our head tends to go. And yet, a huge part of our success or failure in anything we do really comes down to the people that are involved. So we want to really start thinking creatively and strategically about our human capital. This is kind of what Second Chance was talking about, really recognizing that they've got this human capital but they need to be using it more strategically. Now, the good news is you don't have to start at square one with this, because most organizations already have certain human capital strategies in place for your organization. And if you think back to the list that you guys generated during the culture conversation, a lot of those challenges apply to paid staff and volunteers. And you may already have things in place to address them. You may have job descriptions, an employee handbook. And it's important to think about how everyone, both paid and unpaid, staff and volunteers, are equipped to succeed. What are you doing to help them be successful? A lot of people think about paid staff and volunteers separately and manage them in very different ways. And yes, there are some differences, but as you start moving toward becoming a service enterprise, you should think about your overall process for maximizing all human capital to achieve the best outcome for your organization, to achieve your goals. And although human capital policies and practices can vary widely from one organization to another, there are certain functions that are kind of standard. And think about the policies and processes that you have when it comes to selecting the right talent for a role, whether it's paid or unpaid, how to transition that person into the organization, how to develop individuals to meet the goals that you're giving them, how to handle grievances, and other examples of policies and processes that you have in place for paid staff that can translate over pretty easily into how you work with volunteers as well. One way to look at your human capital strategy is to actually add volunteers into your org chart in a way that shows their contributions to your mission, to achieving your goals. You can also rewrite things such as staff position descriptions to reflect roles with volunteers. In other words, to say that it is an expectation that they effectively engage volunteers. You can rewrite or create volunteer position descriptions that really clarify the expectations for different volunteer roles. And you can add to your strategic plan and or your annual goals something that reflects your service enterprise work, right? If it's that important, it should be part of those big plans that you have written. So I'm going to give you guys a task. Let me look at the time. All right, I'm going to give you 10 minutes, and this is what I want you to do. You're going to go back to that Downtown Women's Center case study, and you're also going to look at the MEND org chart. The MEND org chart looks like this. Okay, so this is what you're looking for. And I want you to look for specific things that these organizations do to maximize their human capital. Okay, so it can be in the case study that you read or looking at that org chart. And when we come back, I am going to ask 3 or 4 of you to share ways that you saw these organizations maximizing their human capital. Okay, any questions? All right, your time starts now. Remember, this is what you're looking for with that MEND organizational chart.
Hey, Chris, Jeff is asking where they can find the min chart. I can go ahead and just answer that question. Jeff, in your manual, your session manual, it's going to be under session 2, under what we're doing now. After page 15, there's a couple position descriptions, and then the following page should be the MEND organizational chart.
And if you don't have a binder, Jeff, it's the Word
Yes.
document labeled participant materials for building support.
Yes, also the digital way.
Thanks, Jason.
Everyone is welcome.
Okay, your 2-minute warning. All right, guys, let's come back together. And I'm going to call on a few of you. I want you to, if you're one of the lucky people that gets called on, I'd like you to share one thing that you noticed that these service enterprise organizations do to maximize human capital. And we're going to start with South Jersey. So unmute yourself. Tell us what you saw.
So one of the things was identifying our needs and gaps and communicating them to the staff and the volunteers.
There you go. There you go. Figure out what you need help with and then ask for help. Thank you. Very good. Shelby, what did you notice?
We loved how DWC used the grad students that were part of a nutrition program in their grad school to help with the nutrition counseling.
Yeah.
That's part of their health services. I thought that was a great identifier of a skills-based volunteer group to tap into.
Excellent. If you live near a university, that is a great place for you to look. But every community has experts of some sort that you can identify that can help you out. All right, San Marcos. Remember to unmute, San Marcos.
Okay, so one thing we noticed is that its website is used to recruit volunteers and keep the community abreast of new opportunities. And they're able to share volunteer success stories.
Okay, and that's a great way to motivate volunteers, right? Keep them motivated and also to inform people about what volunteers are doing. So, and motivated humans are going to be more interested in contributing more to the organization. So that's great. I want to share, thank you to those of you who shared. I want to share with you, here's that org chart that we talked about, right? And if we take a look at the org chart for MEND, you'll see all of these boxes that I marked in yellow. these are all positions that are held by volunteers. And a couple of these, the medical director and dental director, there's a name of a specific person. But for the rest of these, you're seeing that they have dental volunteers. We don't have every person listed here, but we have volunteers in the dental program, the medical program, Christmas program, the homeless showers, clothing center, etc. And we do the same thing with Best Friends. This is our volunteer engagement org chart, or at least a part of it, a simplification of it. And we have got volunteers built into this org chart. Okay, for our regional event volunteer coordinators, we have 3 of those. We also have in our animal areas at the sanctuary, there's staff who work there, but when staff are off or they're maybe on PTO, something like that, we have volunteer coordinators who will come in and do the job of paid staff on those particular days. Again, no names, just the roles. We definitely rely on volunteers in our events department, national events, and I think Kimberly has mentioned before, if you come to our conference, we've got specific volunteer roles. These are people who are like in leadership positions that help us put on our conference. Same is true for our Strut Your Mutt events. Okay, so our next thing that we're going to look at here, this is a worksheet that's in your binder, but in the interest of getting you out of here on time, there's just a few of these that I actually want to highlight for you. If we go down to the 3rd one, it says, do your job descriptions for paid staff, mention working with volunteers. Guess what? We're going to keep bringing this up all throughout Service Enterprise. This is a really important thing to do if you can do it. It's kind of unreasonable to expect our staff to work with volunteers if that's not clearly spelled out in their job description. So make it clear. And of course, no one's going to pay attention to it if it's not something that they're going to be held accountable for. So if it's in their job description that they need to effectively engage volunteers, then that also needs to be something that's looked at in their performance reviews. Another thing, and we've already kind of touched on this, is providing professional development to your employees to help them understand how to better engage volunteers. When you are looking at your action plan for effective training, that section is talking not just about how you train your volunteers, but also how you train your staff to work with volunteers. So that's really important. Going back to hiring for staff, you can put it in the job description for those staff that they're expected to engage volunteers. You can hold them accountable in their performance reviews, but let's start right from the beginning of making it clear that this is an important part of their job. Talk to them about volunteering when you're interviewing. Look for those people. Look for people who have been volunteers or who have had experience working with volunteers. They're coming in then with that skill set. And another thing that you're going to need to do as part of your action plan is having a formal plan. We're all having trouble talking today. A formal plan in place to handle grievances and performance challenges with between staff and volunteers. Okay, so that's something you're going to be working on. Moving on to action plan ideas. Here's the part where you're not cheating. We're giving you some ideas. As we have mentioned, take a look at your org chart and figure out where can you plug in volunteers. Okay, add volunteer engagement to your hiring process. Okay, ask about it in interviews, put it in job descriptions, and evaluate your staff based on how well they do that. Include volunteers into your strategic and annual plans, and figure out what needs in your organization can be handled by volunteers, and really be open-minded about that. There are a lot of things volunteers can do that you might not think of at first. So this says needs that are volunteer friendly. I almost feel like that might tend to make you limit yourself a little bit. Pretty much a volunteer can do anything that a human can do. They really can. So really be open-minded in thinking about roles that they can take on. Another thing that we're going to be talking about a lot throughout Service Enterprise is impact. And impact, a lot of times when we say, well, what do you track with your volunteers? You know, how do you measure their impact? And what we hear all the time is, well, we track the number of volunteers we have, and we track the number of hours that they volunteer. And it's kind of like low-hanging fruit, right? We really want to stretch ourselves when we're talking about impact to look at other ways that we are monitoring the impact of our volunteers. We need to have other approaches to impact. This helps us to better understand the contributions that our volunteers make. I always say time is like money, right? In and of itself, time and money aren't worth anything. It's what you do with the time or do with the money that's of value. So we need to go beyond saying, oh, you know, our volunteers gave us 17,000 hours last year. It's like, that's great. And what did they do with that? What did they accomplish with that time? We need to figure out which of our roles yield the most impact. Okay. We don't want our volunteers to just be doing busy work. That's not our intention. We want to make sure that the volunteer engagement goals that we have, the things that we want our volunteers to do, are going to impact our program and budget goals in a positive way. So don't just make up a volunteer goal for no reason. You want to make sure it's aligning with your organization's program and budget goals. And we need to articulate volunteer value in meaningful ways. So we always say you need a combination of the head and the heart. So you might say, we had 137 animals in foster with our volunteers last year. That's a number, that's your head. Where's the heart in that story? Here's the story of volunteer Joe who fostered 39 of those animals. Okay, so you want to try to give meaningful stories to share impact. Another thing that we're going to do to look at impact is we're going to be calculating something called ROVI, which stands for Return on Volunteer Impact, Return on Volunteer Investment. Sorry, guys, I have impact on the brain. And this is a whole spreadsheet. Those of you who love spreadsheets, I know you're very excited about this. It's got the formulas in and everything. And what it's going to do is you're going to put in what are your costs for engaging volunteers, and then what are you getting out of that in return. So for example, for every dollar you invest in your volunteer program, are you getting back $3 worth of bang for your buck, $6, $15? This is the sort of thing that can really be powerful when you go to leadership, when you go to your board, when you go to your city government and say, hey, you know what, we would like to have the funds for a full-time volunteer coordinator because here's our return on investment. This is the bang we get for our buck in our volunteer program. And you're going to see usually when you start working as a service enterprise, as you make these changes to your program, you are going to see that your return on investment very often increases. And that's a positive sort of growth you like to see. All right. I believe, Kimberly, it goes back to you now.
It does.
Did I forget anything?
No, I think you
Okay.
did perfect.
You just kind of had a tone like, it does, but first.
It's my DJ voice.
It's your DJ voice. It's your sexy voice. Okay, Kimberly's going to wrap up now with her sexy voice.
Oh, that's scary. Hold on a second. All right. So, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, and then little annoying pop-up that Office 365 always gives me. Okay, so we get to take a break here, guys, till mid-October. Our next session is going to be on October 15th from 11 to 1 Mountain Time. Here is your pre-work for our next session. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is come prepared for the next session by gathering financial information, your budgets and expenses around volunteer engagement. Okay, Hillary, I know this is going to be a little more challenging for you, being in the international organization, but come to the table. Yeah, come to the table with that financial information. Chris just talked about calculating your return on volunteer investment. We are going to talk more about that on October 15th, and we are going to give you the value of volunteer time for your state. Hillary will give you guys the national value, since you guys are all over the place. And then we're going to have you calculating that. So you're going to want to bring this information to the October 15th session. You're also going to want to bring your SED or diagnostic results with you. So again, hopefully the team leads have made copies for everyone on their Service Enterprise Guiding Coalition. At the beginning of this session, I talked about the action plan, and we would like for you to start working on your first draft action plan. We don't expect it to be perfect. We just want you to take a stab at it. We're not looking for perfection here, folks. Kind of like the artist drawings we did a couple of weeks ago. We're not looking for perfection here. But again, I'm looking for a minimum of 2 to 3, let's just say 3, a minimum of 3 action items for planning and development, leadership support, and effective training. Again, please group them by characteristic so you're not jumping from one characteristic action item to the next. Feel free to put a little space in between. We're pretty anal on my team, and so we like a little space in between. So, and you'll see as your action plan grows, it's nice to have a dividing line between one characteristic and the next. So again, 3 action items for planning and development, leadership support, and effective training. Use your diagnostic results to help guide which action items you'd like to do, or again, what other things you've come to the conclusion you need to work on since you started Service Enterprise, or things you're planning on working on. Give yourself credit for all that you're doing. And then I would like the team lead, again, this is not a team lead exercise, this is a Guiding Coalition exercise, but I'd like the team lead to send that first draft plan to me the week of September 29th. So that is next week. I will give you through the end of the day next Friday, October 4th. You don't have to get it to me on the 29th or the 30th. You have through end of day, Friday, October 4th to get it to me, but we do want to take a look at those during the break so that we can review them and give you feedback before the next session on October 15th. So I'm going to stop for a second and just ask if there are any questions about the action plan homework again before we wrap up. Okay, if you have any questions, we're always available via email, and if not, then we look forward to reviewing your action plans later next week. And again, enjoy your break, because we'll be busy again on October 15th. We'll go another full 2-hour session. Not only are we going to talk about return on volunteer investment, we're going to start to tell you about the final session, which I did update the calendar invite. It is now scheduled for November 19th, but we will talk about the final session during the next training session and talk a little bit about the presentations that each organization will need to give. So more to come in a few weeks. All right, everybody, thanks for your time and have a great day. And we'll get out the webinar recording and slides tomorrow along with a reminder for the homework. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.